So last year for Halloween, I kinda overdid it. I overworked myself. So while it is going to be a slightly lighter load of videos, I look forward to delivering a much higher quality lineup. Initially, I'd actually planned to review every Friday the 13th movie and do a 13th video about the Friday the 13th series in order to make Halloween the 13 days of Friday the 13th. But that's a bit insane, so I will do the Friday the 13th movies at some point in time. But for this year's Halloween, let's start it off right with a Simpsons Halloween special. Now, I am going to keep this brief, because I did actually cover Treehouse of Horror 3 in an earlier Simpsons and Me video while talking about the unreleased version of it. You can check that one out. It's a little earlier. I wasn't quite as good at recording and editing, but it's there. The only reason I am redoing this episode is because it did not fall into the ranking system that I established for the Simpsons and Me single episode reviews when I did it, so let's just go over this real quick. When it comes down to fans, talking about which is the best overall Treehouse of Horror episode, 5 is more often than not the number one pick, and with good cause. But when you think about what is after Treehouse of Horror 5, what takes the runner-up spot, there's usually a little bit of debate, and it kind of just jumps between 3, 4, and 7. I think in terms of pure consistency, I would put 3 in the second place, but 4 can come and take that at any time. It's really dependent on my mood. What Treehouse of Horror 3 has going in its favor is 3 powerhouse segments, a modicum of memorable gags, and it's the one Treehouse of Horror that kind of set the trend for future Treehouse of Horrors. 1 and 2 were great in their own right, but 3 feels like they were just kind of starting to get the hang of it and, figuring out what they wanted from these episodes. It is noteworthy in that is the second to last Treehouse of Horror episode to feature wraparound segments, and the final one to feature wraparound segments that one could argue exist within the canon world of The Simpsons, which in this case is Bart, Lisa, a bunch of the Springfield kids having a Halloween party that's hosted by Marge and Homer.
Behold mighty Caesar in all his glory!
Now, the framing in the first one, as we know, is Bart and Lisa exchanging scary stories in the treehouse. The framing for the second one is the bad dreams, and the framing for this one is the kids telling stories at the party. Which I kind of miss this. I like the concept that these are all stories being told by the Simpsons kids, and I guess I understand why they stopped this, because these wraparound segments end up taking valuable time away from the stories. But it kind of just falls into my theory that as the Simpsons became more popular, they started putting less effort into actually crafting episodes.
It's the story of a boy and his doll.
That's not so scary.
A doll from hell.
I'm gonna go to the store.
We start things off with The Clown Without Pity, which I will say is a very good warm-up story. It's funny, it's got its gags, but it does not outshine the segments that follow it. I think the perfect format to do a Treehouse of Horror episode is you start things off with a gag-heavy one to draw you in, or failing that, a shocking one to draw you in, and you follow this up with either a solid horror-centric one or a stylized one, and those two are interchangeable between the second and third. The Clown Without Pity takes inspiration from several killer doll stories from film and television. It does have some elements of Child's Play, but for the most part it draws from Trilogy of Terror's Amelia segment, as well as the classic Twilight Zone Living Doll episode.
Hello?
My name is Talkie Tina, and I'm going to kill you.
I'm Krusty the Clown, and I'm going to kill you.
Didn't even pull the string that time.
But it also has some of its own original beats. Homer clearly plays the role of Telly Savalas from The Living Doll, but the Krusty doll itself acts more like the Zuni doll from Trilogy of Terror. And this is a kind of a loose one, but the whole concept of Bart getting this doll for his birthday is similar to Child's Play, but even still, Child's Play was probably the most recent popular killer doll movie when this came out. But then there's a few other little bits of inspiration. For example, the guy who owns the occult store is clearly based off the store owner from Gremlins. They really did cram a lot of pop culture into this episode as a whole. I didn't even mention the opening being a parody of Alfred Hitchcock Presents. But it's not distracting. It adds to it. This whole exchange between Homer and the shopkeep is one of the best parts of the episode. I've said that, but everybody in my group has been like, that's good, that's bad. When there's a rant going on, it's burned into my brain. But from here on, the episode really delivers with the comedy. You got the whole thing with Homer and the shopkeep shopkeeper. And then this part, I never really, like, it never clicked with me how funny this is, how Milhouse just gets smoked by the door. There's just no reason for it. He's just playing pin the tail on the donkey and he gets creamed by this door. And when the doll starts actively trying to kill Homer and nobody believes him, that's where the living doll inspiration comes from. But then, you know, the whole solution to it is kind of a slap in the face, but in the funniest way possible, because it turns out the Krusty doll was acting like it because it was set to evil.
Here's your problem. Someone set this thing to evil.
I love you, Homer.
Come here, you.
And now, instead of having a doll that's trying to kill him, he has a doll that's totally subservient to him and is having hot, disgusting sex with Lisa's Malibu Stacy. Clown Without Pity is fast-paced, has a lot of solid gags and lines in it, but it's nothing really groundbreaking, but it doesn't have to be. It provides the laughs, like, every second of its runtime. All in all, solid entry. I'd give it a 6.5 out of 10, slightly above average.
I was a fool to think anyone would want nude photos of Whoopi Goldberg. What the?
So I want to kind of retread my first video here by bringing up some other things I noticed that really kind of exposed that this episode was changed in a hurry. Like, as we all know, as I mentioned in my unaired version of Treehouse of Horror 3, that this episode apparently came back and was just, like, terrible, and they had to alter it heavily within 6 weeks to air. We don't know to what degree that it was altered. Like, Bill Oakley, in a tweet that I've lost since then, said it was basically some line changes and some other stuff. But you look at this episode and certain aspects of it are really cut down. There's a lot of stock animation used. But one thing I noticed is how vague the descriptions are that the characters give for the stories they're gonna tell. For example, Clown Without Pity, just the way Lisa describes it has nothing to do with the episode. She says it's about a boy and his doll, and the doll's from hell. And it's like, now, doll from hell, that could mean like, oh, it's just like a bad doll, it's evil. But the story doesn't really feature Bart with the doll. It features Homer with the doll. Like, Bart gets the doll, but he doesn't really interact with it after it starts trying to kill Homer. Which makes me speculate that this might have actually been more of a Child's Play parody when they first did it, but then when it came back and it wasn't any good, they just, like, altered it. Purely speculative, but it would make sense. Now, I do have a few other theories, but we'll get to those at the end of the other segments. Following that, we get probably the most iconic entry of this episode.
So then his wife comes through the door.
So?
Did I mention she was dead?
No.
Well, she was. And she hit him in the head with a golf club.
And?
Don't you remember? He went golfing all the time and it really bugged her.
You said he went bowling!
No!
King Homer, which, as you may guess, features Homer as King Kong. It's framed as Grandpa just, like, not having a good horror story and then reciting the King Kong movie, like, beat for beat. Style-wise, this one's, like, perfect. It's amazing. They really try and capture that 1930s aesthetic with the black and white and some of the shots, but this one really also brings the laughter. The women in semen joke is a very early example of blue humor from this show. The whole segment where they're actually trying to capture Homer with, like, Lenny getting eaten and, like, getting shot by Carl, which in, like, syndicated versions this didn't show.
Hey, Homer, cut it out. Come on, quit eating me. Ow! Nice shot, Carl.
No! No!
Hey, Homer, cut it out. Come on, quit eating me.
No! No!
I only ever saw it on the DVD and then later on cable. The big kicker in the early portions of King Homer is Mr. Burns singing that he was strolling through the gas one day.
I was strolling through the gas one day.
We would rewind this scene repeatedly when we had this on DVD. But, you know, as I get older, it becomes less about the visual gags and the more in-your-face gags, and you start really laughing, like, for more abstract reasons. Like, for example, one day, my friend Adam and I were just, like, drunk, and I quoted the Candy Apple Island thing because of how dumb it is, and we just, like, died.
Hey, I heard we're going to Ape Island.
Yeah, to capture a giant ape. I wish we were going to Candy Apple Island.
Candy Apple Island? What do they got there?
Apes, but they're not so big.
For the most part, it is a pretty faithful parody of the original 1930s King Kong, but it actually does have some nods to the 70s remake as well, particularly when the photographer gets stepped on. But I also love how King Homer just leaves Barney alone, like, after the peanut incident. And also, here's your fun fact for the day. The part where Homer eats Shirley Temple actually pissed off the real Shirley Temple so much that when she was offered a chance to guest star on the show as herself in the episode Last Tap Dance in Springfield, killed, she turned it down because of this joke. All in all, King Homer hits like every beat that a Treehouse of Horror segment should. It's a great entry. It's got some of the funniest Treehouse of Horror moments in the entire show's run. It has cool little tributes to the original source material. And it's just an example of them getting very creative with the concept and not like straying too far from it. It's like the perfect spoof of King Kong. It's really all I can say about it, and I am fully comfortable dropping a 9.5 out of 10 on this. It's that solid.
I was strolling through the gas one day.
So as I'd previously mentioned, Treehouse of Horror 3 was heavily altered with 6 weeks to air due to it being unsatisfactory, and this has led me to believe that most of the segments were altered in some form. With that being said, King Homer, I can't really see where they would have altered it unless they absolutely like completely redid it within that 6 weeks to air, which I don't think is the case. I think this one is mostly untouched. It's complete. There's no real reused animations besides the zoom in on Homer's face, which is a parody of the shots they used in the original King Kong. So whereas Clown Without Pity, I could possibly believe that it was an entirely different story before it aired, King Homer seems for the most part to be what it was supposed to be. The only thing really worth noting is that Grandpa's introduction to it is very vague and very brief. All he says is,
Grandpa, why don't you tell us a story? You've led an interesting life.
That's a lie, and you know it. But I have seen a lot of movies.
So, I don't know. Unless I get to see like a full-on script and draft of the original Treehouse of Horror 3, which I should probably actually look up before I finish this video, I'm just going to assume that King Homer was the diamond in the rough that was left untouched. To close it out, we get our final story, but before that, there's like this really weird moment where Flanders like scares everybody with this really graphic like Tom Savini level zombie outfit. It just serves as a reminder of like when Ned Flanders was like still a Christian, but he was fun and got in on things and he wasn't like a crazy Flanderized god nut. But nevertheless, everything closes out appropriately with a zombie story titled Dial Z for Zombies. Now what this one is, it's kind of like a halfway between the supernatural zombies and the regular virus zombies. After trying to pass a children's book off as his book report,
Bart, you mean to tell me you read a book intended for preschoolers?
Well, most of it.
You have to read another book.
Bart is told to read another book, and he finds a book of the occult and uses a spell to raise the dead. This isn't like a particular parody of any zombie movie, but if I had to compare it to one that already existed, I would immediately go for Return of the Living Dead. Like, I'm not even shitting you, they actually kind of did a loose parody of Return of the Living Dead. The zombies retain their intelligence to some degree, they go after brains. It's literally Return of the Living Dead, just without trioxin, with instead a spell. In terms of substance, this isn't like an all-time great or anything, but it's chaotic and it's very funny. I think Flanders' scream is like one of the most brutal screams in the show's history.
Why, Sue Dokes, you rascal. I thought you were dead and...
It has all sorts of funny undead moments, like Krusty getting pulled into the box, Skinner eating Martin, and that little squeal Martin lets out. Like, why did he go? Why didn't he just run away?
Martin Prince, report to my office at once. And bring that big, juicy chess club brain of yours along with you.
I would go as far as to say it's probably the best zombie-related story they've ever done in a Treehouse of Horror. The "he was a zombie" line is great, the undead famous people thing is ridiculous, like what's Shakespeare doing there? The whole story starts abruptly, ends abruptly, comes and goes, it's fast-paced, it delivers and it exits like a good final segment should. Easy 7 out of 10, not perfect, but it's still pretty great.
I thought you were dead and...
Again, kind of like King Homer, I think Dial Z for Zombies pretty much just like came out as intended, but it does seem awfully short and kind of rushed. I'm guessing this was always supposed to be a zombie story, but due to the aforementioned unsatisfactory copy of the episode that came back, they probably trimmed a lot of it and streamlined it. The only evidence here that there might have actually been a completely different story is the fact that the explanation for this one is even more vague than the explanation for King Homer.
I've got a story so scary, you'll wet your pants.
Too late.
but once again, speculative. And I feel I should note that in terms of syndication versions, this story I think has the most stuff cut out of it. Clown Without Pity, as far as I can tell, doesn't have anything cut out of it in syndication. King Homer just has the Lenny gag cut out, but no, this one has like 2 whole things cut out of it. That is Willie when the zombies come out of the garden and they don't attack him, and the end with Quimby delivering a speech. Like, when I first saw this episode on the CBC, it literally just cut from the zombies all going back into their graves to the whole commentary about how TV turns people into mindless zombies. As a whole, Treehouse of Horror 3 is pretty well balanced. There isn't a segment in it where I look at it and I'm like, that one's not so great, let's skip that one. All 3 range from high mid to just high quality, and the wraparound segments are pretty good too, and as I said, it's the last one to do these kind of wraparound segments. If I had it my way, I'd trade the extended opening sequences that they do now for like a decently okay wraparound segment. Like, it's cool to get some of the character moments in here, like Homer with his Caesar outfit and Martin getting punched, which actually does remind me, going back to my original unreleased version of this episode video, I do believe that there was a closing wraparound segment that they just cut. I'm still holding out hope to this day that some sort of work print of the original unaired Treehouse of Horror 3 exists and that it may be released one day, because I want to know what was so wrong with it that they had to alter it. Like, they legit, like, with 6 weeks to air, redid the whole thing. Which, if you're up on your Simpsons, the production of The Simpsons is a very tight ship, though, like, seasons are done a year before they air. Some of them must have just really not landed in that original version, but for more on that, check out my previous video that I did on it where I go a little bit more into it. As a whole, I'm going to rank Treehouse of Horror 3 a solid 8.5 out of 10, near legendary, but it's nowhere near mythical. It's one of the ones I remember seeing on television the most growing up, as syndication deals for the time when I was like 5 or 6 only really showed episodes from seasons 1 to 5. As time went on, more seasons were included in syndication deals, and this one became less frequently aired, but nevertheless, I love this one. In terms of consistency, it is only beaten by Treehouse of Horror 4 and 5. So what are your thoughts on Treehouse of Horror 3? Let me know in the comments, and stay tuned because I have a movie that I've never really actually referenced on here, but I actually do love this series, and I'm going to start with the first one next week, or maybe the end of this week, whenever it's done being edited. It is Maniac Cop. Like, subscribe, and yeah.
Excuse me, I'm John Smith.
John Smith, 1882.
My mistake.